This is the May 13th, 2019 Board of Supervisors Budget Workshop, 1:30 p.m.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much for your patience. Today is May the 13th, and we are agendized for a 1:30 p.m. budget workshop. So what I'm going to do is turn to the clerk and ask her to begin with item number 1, which is the roll call for the purpose of establishing the presence of a quorum. Madam Clerk?
Supervisor Ellenberg? Here. Supervisor Wasserman?
Here.
Supervisor Cortese? Here. Vice President Chavez? Here. And President Samidia?
Here.
You have a quorum.
For the record, we have all 5 members of the board present and in attendance. That takes us to item number 2, which is the Pledge of Allegiance. And what I'm going to do is ask that all who are able please rise and join us in the pledge, which will be led today by Supervisor Mike Wasserman. Supervisor? To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all very much. That takes us to item number 3, which is public comment. Public comment is that portion of our agenda set aside for comment on non-agendized items that are properly within the jurisdiction of our board. Again, if you're here to speak on an item that is on the agenda, we would ask that you offer your comments at that time. That being said, we have half a dozen cards from folks who would like to speak under public comment, which is item number 3. And we have 6 cards thus far. Do we have any more cards under public comment? All right, then if not, we'll say all in. And pursuant to the rules of the board, as indicated in our published agenda, we'll allow up to 2 minutes for public comment. Let me ask that Vaughn, I believe it's Flaming, come on up to the microphone, followed by Carmen Vargas, followed by Christy Bethke, followed by Melissa Willett, followed by Scott Largent, and then Michael O'Connor. Vaughn Flaming, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Vaughn Flaming, and I'm a library assistant at the Medical Library, Santa Clara Valley Health and Hospital System. I think about many times that we have heard the county say that they'd love to do more, but there just isn't money in the budget. Think about how the county workers and residents tightened our belts and making sacrifices during the Great Recession. In the years since, the county has been posting a surplus every single year totaling $492 million in the last 5 years. What have we seen of that? The county's general fund grew by hundreds of millions of dollars and is on track to add another $62.9 million this year alone. Well, many of us slipped through the cracks. What's even more frightening is the county's annual budget has been off by over $1.1 billion in the last 5 years. Is the county intentionally misrepresenting the health of their budget to workers and the residents, denying us a chance to participate in a meaningful discussion about resources? Or is the county actually wrong by this astonishing margin? Neither is comforting as a thought. Our budget analysis shows that the county can't afford to do more. And we know that workers and residents desperately need them to do more. For our county to be a place that works for everyone, the county needs to make a robust investment in public services our residents depend on and the people who provide those services, and that's us. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Carmen Vargas. Ms. Vargas, welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Carmen Vargas. I work for Santa Clara County as a social worker in the Social Services Agency. I am a member of SEIU Local 521. We are here today asking this board to work with us to make Santa Clara County a place where all working families, no matter who we are or where we come from, are able to provide for our loved ones and build a brighter future. I would like to tell you about our member, Tom. Tom works in Elmwood in mental health. He says in Elmwood, we cannot hire enough mental health staff to fill many open positions. As a result, we have time only for crisis response. Almost all the women Tom serves have a history of abuse going back to their childhood. Tom is trained in trauma treatment and provided when he can, which is sparingly. If we were fully staffed, Tom and others could treat traumatized veterans and women. This is a huge unmet need, and it's widely recognized that trauma-informed treatment is needed to prevent recidivism. To attract mental health workers to the jails, we need the county to be an employer of choice. Our communities need Santa Clara County to work for everyone, not just the wealthiest in our community. When you are reviewing the budget today, please keep in mind Tom and thousands of workers like him. Thank you.
Thank you. Christy Bethke, to be followed by Melissa Willett.
Good afternoon. My name is Christy Bethke. I am a member of SEIU Local 521. I am trying to get my job at St. Louis Regional Hospital back when I was left behind during the transition during medical leave. We are here today asking this board for work with us to make Santa Clara County a place where all working families, no matter who we are or where we come from, are able to provide for our loved ones and build a brighter future. I would like to tell you about our member, Maria. Maria is a health information technician at O'Connor Hospital. Maria has been living in Santa Clara County for many years. She has a family of 6, and she feels that no matter how many extra jobs her and her husband do, it is never enough. She knows that access to quality and affordable childcare would give her family an opportunity to be successful and her children to have a chance to be able to support themselves when they are older. Maria doesn't want her family to be a public charge. She will be able to provide better services to her patients when she has a job that allows her to provide for her family and live in the community where she works. As employees, we are here today asking this board to work with us to make Santa Clara County a place where all working families, no matter who we are or where we come from, we are able to provide for our loved ones and build a brighter future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Melissa Willett.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Melissa Willett. I'm a member of SEIU Local 521, and we are here today asking this board to work with us to make Santa Clara County a place where all working families, no matter who we are or where we come from, are able to provide for our loved ones and build a brighter future. I would like to share the concerns of Andrea, a social work supervisor in the Department of Family and Children's Services. Andrea knows firsthand that we need to put children in our community first. We need to advocate for a better facility to keep children safe, especially for children who have been removed from their parents, guardians, or caregivers due to abuse and neglect. We need qualified staffing in the children's shelter, including nurses and medical personnel. Social workers and counselors should not be administering medicine. This is just one of the many issues Andrea faces working here in Santa Clara County. While reviewing the budget this week, please prioritize staffing and ensuring Santa Clara County is an employer of choice. As Vaughn mentioned earlier, we've completed an analysis that shows the county can do more for our community and workers. We have copies of the analysis for the board, and if anyone in the audience would like a copy, we can provide those as well.
Thank you very much. I have cards from Scott Largent and Michael O'Connor.
Thank you, Tiffany. Scott Largent, I was going through a list of different videos that I've been filming and putting online. I apologize, I'm not as prepared. Normally I don't jot things down, but I've been putting some creative titles together for the videos I've been filming. One of the ones which was recent is Left to Die on the Streets of San Jose. And her name's Chevelle, and she's been bounced from St. James Park all the way down to City Hall. She's had about 20 different stops. Chevelle's the one I was telling you that's trying to actually shoot honey. She's a meth addict. She's also a heroin addict, but she's trying to inject honey into her veins. She's half naked all the time down there. Some of the most shocking things came out the last couple of days when she was sitting at the corner, and I apologize for my language. She literally had her legs up in the air with her JJ hanging out, screaming, yelling, telling everybody to have their way with her so she can get meth. I think she is beyond repair in a way where we need to put her somewhere. So I spent 2 days out there calling the county's dispatch number, okay, that we're supposed to be able to get these clinicians out there. They couldn't make it happen. And I'm telling you, that was the most frustrating thing, walking from City Hall and only walking 100 feet down the road, and they couldn't get people out there. And then I just sat there with this woman because I was so worried about people having their way with her. And I was just so worried. And I've been around her now for, I've been filming her for about a month. No one can do anything for her. San Jose PD is absolutely clueless, and they do not trust what the county can do. They don't think that she's going to get help. They think that she'll just be let out in an hour or in 48 hours. So I don't know what to do with this woman. The system is not working right now. I went to the mental health meeting this morning. I talked with Margaret. I can't pronounce her last name, so I am sorry. She took some of my concerns and listened to me. Chevelle will be dead soon. I'm just letting you all know that. And the videos are up on YouTube. Please take a look. Help this woman. We can't wait another year for government to get their act together. She's going to die. Thank you.
And we have one more speaker, and I believe it's Mr. O'Connor. Please come forward.
Good afternoon, supervisors, executives, counselors, and members of the public. My name is Michael O'Connor. I am what's known as an estate administrator in the Public Guardian's Office of Santa Clara County. I am here today. I am here on behalf of myself and my wife and my kids. My wife took her 4th job last month as a teaching instructor for her kids' preschool. I'm here to really ask one question, and this is one question to pose for your thought. Is there a recession? Is there a recession that's immediately present upon us? I've reviewed the information that's here. I've reviewed some of the budgets. I've reviewed the information, and I hear fear of recession, fear of recession, fear of recession. That's being used for all kinds of excuses. Is there a recession is the question I'm going to ask you. Is there a reason for all this? Is there any validity to this excuse? So I'll leave you with the rest of my time to ponder that thought. Because if there is one, I think there should be some running on lost jobs and some possible danger management, risk management. But in this case, everything looks full steam ahead. So I want to leave you with that thought. Have an excellent day, and thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you all very much. Let me just confirm with the clerk. I believe that was the last speaker under public comment, item number 3. All right. Well, that concludes item number 3. And for those of you who've not been here before for public comment, a reminder is our agenda indicates that we're precluded from taking action on non-agendized items that are raised during public comment or even engaging in significant discussion of a non-agendized items. But for the record, duly noted, and thank you again for being here. That takes us to item number 4 under regular agenda, items for discussion. And let me turn to Dr. Smith and see who we'd like to have present on this item. And we do have at least one speaker card on this item, colleagues.
We have public health and environmental health here to report.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Sarah Cody, County Public Health Officer.
And I'm Michael Ballier, Director for Environmental Health.
And Mike's going to give a quick thumbnail, and then we'll ask for any questions.
Thank you.
Yes, before you today, we have a request to extend the declared emergency regarding lead exposure at Target Master West and Sweets Gymnastics. If you recall, we had issued emergency orders to close down both facilities when we discovered that there was contamination at the gymnastics center where children as young as 3 perform gymnastics. And so at this point, we're continuing to work with both business owners and several regulatory agencies to better define the cleanup that needs to occur, and we need some additional time in order to do that. And if you have any questions, we're definitely here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Colleagues, we do have just one card on this item. Would you like to hear from that member of the public first and then move to questions and comments? I see some nodding heads, so I'm going to go ahead and ask Mr. Bill Heskett if he would like to come forward on this item. Welcome, and as the clock should indicate, you've got up to 2 minutes to share your thoughts. Go to it.
Okay. Bill Heskett, I'm the owner of the range. Bought it in 2004. Facility opened in '82. It's a very long-term established facility. And I wanted to assure everybody that we're doing everything we can to clean it up. And I wanted to publicly apologize to Mr. Sweets for getting caught up in my mess. I wanted to assure that I've actually got two different teams working on it, one that I've hired locally and then one that's more of a statewide national team. I've got the contacts for them if anybody wants them. I just want to say that it is going to get cleaned up, and I'm going to do my darndest to make certain that I come out the other side with this facility being a premier example of what to do right, with the help of my consultants and the experience I've gained to date. That's about it.
Thank you very much for being here.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Let me just confirm with the clerk that there are no other cards on this item, no other folks who want to speak. All right, then that means that item number 4 is in fact back before the board. I know there are some questions. I have some myself, but let me turn to colleagues first and see Supervisor Ellenberg, Cortese, Wasserman, Chavez, apparently me. Let me just ask a couple quick questions. I gather that the owners were notified, and thank you for that, because that was a source of concern. And under the recommended action, it indicates that we're being asked in the resolution to extend the proclamation of a local health emergency. And as I read the language in the resolution, not in that one sentence of the recommended action, but in the resolution, that's indefinite because it's until the problem is actually fixed. So that's my first question. Is that correct?
Did you want to answer that?
Sure. It is, however, the statute requires that the board affirmatively review it no less frequently than every 30 days. So this item will have to come back to the board at least every 30 days.
And you're anticipating my next question, but just in terms of the authority and the resolution says until the problem has been addressed.
That is correct.
Okay. Then if we're coming back at least every 30 days, that means no longer than 30 days.
Correct.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. And that's doable with our schedule through the month of May and June, given the meetings we have scheduled. But we do have a summer recess, and that can sometimes prove challenging. So I'm just trying to think ahead a little bit here in terms of the summer recess. Is there good reason to hope and expect that this is a remediable problem within the next 45 days, or are we likely to be looking at a time during July when it will be necessary for our board to act yet again?
I suspect that it will probably take a little bit longer than the 30 days, and so I would anticipate we would come back. I think there's a meeting beginning of July.
All right, thank you. We do have a meeting, I believe it's July the 2nd, that's scheduled, but then my understanding is that the next meeting isn't scheduled until sometime pushing mid-August, so we're in that 30-day challenge time again, and I'm just going to ask staff and the members of the public to sort of be mindful of that as we schedule going forward, okay? The staff report indicates at page 3 of 4 that the results of the testing inside both facilities exceeded the allowable standards for a public building as specified in Title 17, California Code of Regulations, Section 35035. Presumably, and maybe this is a question for Mr. Williams and his team, or possibly environmental health, the regulations are promulgated pursuant to some state statute, yes? So there's authority in state law for all this, and the standards that you're addressing are specific, and there's something like what, parts per million, or what?
Yes, under the section that we're looking at, the standards are set, and for example, for the floor samples, it's 40 micrograms per square foot, so that's all designated by the state.
Okay, thank you very much. Then with that information entered into the record, the clerk should feel free to let us see a voting panel on our screens, and if there is a motion to approve the recommended action, and there is from Supervisor Chavez, I'll ask if there's a second. and there is from Supervisor Wasserman. I'll ask if there's any additional comment or any further questions, and if not, we'll ask all 5 members to please vote on the screen, and we'll ask the clerk to display the results. The motion passes on a 5-0 vote. Again, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you all for being here, and sounds like we'll be hearing more about this in the not-too-distant future. Best of luck. All right. Colleagues, that takes us to item number 5, and this is where we begin our budget workshop overview. And I'm going to turn to the county executive, but before I do, I just want to indicate that I will, over the course of the next few days, as we go through each of the 5 different committee jurisdictions, I'll ask the chair of each committee if he or she has any preliminary remarks they want to make as well. So today, when we get to item number 6, I'll be turning towards Supervisor Ortese, who may or may not have comments. But then when we get to items in the other 4 committee jurisdictions, I will do the same and turn to each one. And if you do, you do, and if you don't, fair enough. So, Dr. Smith, we turn to you on item number 5. We're being asked to receive a report today.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. A little bit of an introduction to today. As you mentioned, you're beginning the budget workshops for the final approval in June of the fiscal year 2019-2020 recommended budget. You will hear today regarding recommendations having to do with those departments that report to Finance and Government Operations Committee. Again, to remind the public and everyone present, today and for the next 3 days, we will be going over the recommendations from the recommended budget. There will not be actions taken on individual budget recommendations. However, this is an opportunity for the board and the public to ask questions and to see the recommendations. A little bit of a overview, excuse me, of the budget this year. This year and for the next 4 years, we anticipate budgets that will reflect implementation of major projects and capital improvements that the board has already approved. We know that the budget will be large, but the requirements for expenditures will also be large. The major capital expenditures that the board has recently approved include taking on 2 more hospitals, rebuilding a central jail, complying with the consent decrees related to the jails, both jails, taking on 2 new general government campuses, building a Vietnamese service center, building a new animal shelter, a new emergency room expansion, building a new hub for youth, building a new juvenile and adult psychiatric unit, preparing for the Voters' Choice Act, continuing with our affordable housing program, preparing for our collective bargaining, all of which we anticipate will cost hundreds of millions of dollars over the next 3 to 4 years. We are therefore recommending a budget that focuses upon implementation, not upon adding new projects. During this budget preparation, the departments put in requests for additional expenditures that totaled almost $90 million. Before you see recommendations for new expenditures that are only equivalent to $29 million and really are focused on implementation of those multiple projects that I just told you about. We've also, in the budget, as you will see, reserved monies for continuation of the projects that I just mentioned, which are multi-year projects, and at this point cannot be extremely accurately predicted. The costs cannot be extremely accurately predicted, so we're recommending set-asides and reserve for those those projects in this next year. As I said, we will continue to expect implementation years for the next 4 years. That's because we do see a downturn in the economy. This particular county and this particular region has seen a stable and increasing revenue for the last 7 years, but we can expect that this 2019-2020 will be the last year with significant assessed valuations higher than 8%. We will continue to see some increase, but nothing in that range. We expect another downturn in the economy, and you will note, just to emphasize that today, the stock market is down 617 points, or around 2%. That is a major loss for the state because the state's revenue is based on capital gains. The county's revenue is based primarily on property values, so we remain stable for the moment. However, we have large state and federal subventions that are definitely at risk in this economy with this administration. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Budget Director Greg Turia, and he will continue with the rest of the presentation.
Good afternoon, President Smitty and members of the board. Greg Turia, County Budget Director. One of the key implementation items for the current fiscal year and the budget year, next fiscal year that begins on July 1st, is the community hospitals integration. As the board well knows, on March 1st, 2019, the county acquired O'Connor Hospital, St. Louis Regional Hospital, and DePaul Health Center to prevent their closure and to provide the community with an integrated healthcare system that spans a large geographic area and that has multidisciplinary approach. The new hospital facilities are now integrated under Santa Clara Valley Medical Center's single license and has a unified medical staff. In August 2019, all electronic health records will be integrated into HealthLink, providing for the standardization of clinical records. The acquisitions increase the capacity of the county's health system to serve the community, which allows the county to maintain access to care throughout many locations, to reduce the need to build a new bed building and other new health construction, enhancing care to provided to all patients. It improves technology and infrastructure throughout the system. It assists in the recruitment and retention of high-quality clinicians and staff. It expands into new lines of services, and it will allow for, in the future, skilled nursing and subacute care, and it reduces the need for providing outside medical services and referrals to other hospitals. Further, the recommended budget addresses jail reform and consent decree compliance. The budget continues funding many jail reforms, correctional facility improvements, expansion of jail medical care, and progress towards the construction of the new treatment-based jail facility. The budget also contains reserves to support further compliance actions approved by the Board of Supervisors in the future. On April 9th, 2019, the Board of Supervisors directed staff to implement the Voters' Choice Act. The recommended budget contains actions and reserves necessary to implement the Voters' Choice Act for use in next year's presidential primary election. Under the Voters' Choice Act method, voters will have more choices and opportunities to register and more choices and opportunities to vote. Measures of success are goal-oriented operational metrics designed to support data-driven decision-making. Introduced 2 years ago, these measurements are assisting departments with strategic planning and support budget development. Many of the measures are published throughout the recommended budget document. The Office of Data Oversight, Management, and Evaluation, otherwise known as ODOM, is leading further development and integration of these measures. The next steps in the evolution of measures of success include many initiatives, including identifying the most meaningful measures, improving development analysis capabilities, the sharing of data, cross-department measurement, as well as use of data to drive multi-departmental collaboration to address system-wide opportunities and challenges. The housing bond measure, approved by voters in November 2016 to develop new affordable housing over 10 years, is big, bold, and successfully well underway to deliver 120 new developments, including 4,800 new dwelling units for extremely low income and very low income households, plus opportunities for moderate income households. However, we need to keep in mind that these bond proceeds can only be used for development and construction. They cannot be used to provide the services to support the people living in these developments. The retail transactions and use tax approved by voters in 2018, then extended in perpetuity in 2018, can be used for services and investments to improve the community. This revenue source is projected to reach $53 million in fiscal year 2019-20. The budget recommends this Measure A, allocating $27.3 million to provide supportive housing services in lieu of other general fund reliance, to serve as a bedrock funding source to support the population moving into the county's affordable housing developments, and to continue the mission of ending and preventing homelessness. The budget also continues previously funded programs approved by the Board of Supervisors. This funding source is well matched to fund the increasing demand for supportive housing services as new housing projects get completed, as these services will improve public safety, health for low-income families, the economy, and school attendance because they help families and other households escape homelessness and remain housed. Since 2011, the county has continuously expanded its role in preventing and reducing homelessness by managing and coordinating services for homeless persons and supportive housing residents throughout Santa Clara County, including developing and implementing strategies to meet the housing needs of men, women, and families who use the county's safety net services. The additional funding needed to serve the new supportive housing units being built from 2016 housing bonds can be solved with the use of incremental revenue growth from the 2012 sales tax, so we can have a long-term financial plan to support the forthcoming new housing costs. For revenue and costs on the horizon, the local tax base has grown 7 to 8% per year for the last 6 years. Property tax revenue will grow by 7% between this fiscal year and next, but then we see a large drop in growth thereafter. Inherent risks from the federal and state funding sources grow sharper as the economy slows and this past business cycle expansion naturally concludes. Of significant concern is the confluence of slowing revenue growth concurrent with the rising cost of providing services. Collective bargaining is currently underway with many employees, so cost of services is uncertain. Even if wage rates remain unchanged, the total cost of employee compensation will increase due to the rising cost of pension and health benefits. So this provides my segue, and oops, hit that a little too fast. There we go. This provides my segue into our economic overview. The economic overview is provided for context to the Board of Supervisors as we enter into the remaining parts of this workshop. In partnership with economists from the UCLA Anderson School of Management, the County Office of Budget and Analysis maintains an economic forecast tailored to the Silicon Valley, and this model is driven by global, national, state, and local data. In the following slides, we will share the highlights and projections derived from our economic forecast. The nation's economy grew by 2.9% in average over 2018, a higher growth pace compared to the usual 2 to 2.5% experienced since the end of the Great Recession. The nation's payroll job growth was 1.7% year over year in 2018. This has been the second longest economic expansion in U.S. history. However, many economists believe that an economic correction is overdue. The U.S. economy grew by 3.2% in the first quarter of this calendar year. So that's January, February, and March. But underlying components of that first quarter suggest a broadly anticipated slowdown is still underway. Consumer spending has been slowing down, and there's weakness in business demand. Retail sales have decelerated to the smallest gain in 3 years. And higher business inventories in the first quarter, especially in the manufacturing industry, which indicates that businesses are stockpiling goods rather than being able to sell them. Therefore, we expect weaker growth in the second quarter, which concludes June 30th. The county's payroll employment levels reached 1.13 million jobs at the end of last year. Nearly 36,000 of these new jobs were added in the Bay Area, and we expect this level to level off in the near future for the reasons stated. The economic growth in Santa Clara County was robust last year with a 3% year-over-year payroll growth. Job growth since the beginning of the economic recovery period in 2010 has been most rapid in San Francisco and Santa Clara County. The unemployment rate has remained a record low territory of 2.3%, and the region is considered effectively at full employment, which means that we do not have enough local labor supply for this rate of growth to continue. For our forecast, Silicon Valley continues to be a high-income region relative to the rest of the state and the nation as a whole. Income gains have outpaced inflation over the past several years. Per capita income rose above $100,000, and median household income reached an all-time high of $118,000. However, economists are forecasting that the economy will enter a slowdown trajectory with even a recession risk in 2020. Job and economic growth will slow due to the slowing U.S. economy, and the trade wars have not yet had a significant negative impact, but that may change very soon with the latest round of tariffs imposed on China last Friday and the retaliation announced by China this morning. The housing cycle has shifted to a more neutral pattern, and including locally, that will affect the trajectory of the county's property tax revenue growth. This anticipated slowdown will have a negative impact to the county's biggest revenue source. Monthly median home values for the 8 largest cities in Santa Clara County show that home price growth, a crucial factor in determining the county's assessment of local taxes, has slowed considerably. From December 2017 to December 2018, the median sale price grew by 2.8%, the lowest rate of growth since 2012. Notably, the County of Santa Clara has seen housing prices declining since December 2018, and the number of homes sold annually has fallen as well. The number of homes sold annually has fallen statewide. In general, home sales in these urban counties were declining in 2018 for 2 reasons. With the rising interest rates by the Fed, higher mortgage rates discouraged some degree of mortgage borrowing and home purchases. The 30-year fixed-rate mortgage rates hit 4.9% in November 2018, the highest level since 2012. Home prices have climbed to a level out of most residents' ability to afford, therefore sales went down naturally. In particular, in Santa Clara, the rapid acceleration of home prices in late 2017 and early 2018 was simply not sustainable. While there has been a very recent drop in mortgage rates, the overall trend has been increasing since early 2017. This chart shows that the county's total assessment local real growth value trend, and based on Proposition 13, 1% of the assessment roll is the total property tax revenue for the county's local government agencies. We're expecting this to flatten out similar to the plateau that you can see in this chart from 2011 to 2013. We're foreseeing a similar flattening out over the next few years. And this chart shows the annual growth rate, so year-over-year growth rate of assessment value, which translates to the following year's property tax growth. And then here is our forecast for property tax annual growth going forward. With the flattening out of real estate prices, the next fiscal year revenue growth will be the last one with large growth. 7% growth in fiscal year 2019-2020 compared to this year, but only a 3.2% year-over-year growth for fiscal year 2020-21, and only a 2.8% growth for 2021-22. The drop in revenue is mostly driven by our projections for the real estate property market. The median sale price has steadily declined since October 2018. And after 6 years of revenue growth around 7 to 8% per year, we forecast one more year, the next fiscal year, with 7% growth, and then flattening to growth much more modest. This is why the 2019-20 budget is limited to implementing previous initiatives and prepares the county for a break from expansion to focus on performance. Taxable sales and payroll employment data do not have a direct effect on property tax revenue, but they are indicative of local economy trends and useful for other aspects of forecasting. So we monitor and project these trends for the county, and we share them, our forecast here for several key economic indicators, including taxable sales, employment, housing price index, personal income, and consumer price index. Absent an adverse intervenor such as war or natural disaster, we project a soft landing as our economy descends from a robust growth period. So in conclusion, we recognize that the economy has been growing at 3%, but a recession in 2020 is possible, not certain, but possible. The trade war with China and Brexit effort are contributing to the global slowdown, which has definitely a direct impact on the economy here in the Silicon Valley because of how much international trade is conducted here. In Santa Clara County's jobs and property tax revenues continue to grow, but they'll grow at a slower rate and then projected to flatten out. And the high cost of housing in the Bay Area is an obstacle to the sustainable growth at the rates we've seen. And that concludes the economic overview. And if the board is ready, we can, unless there's questions from the board on the economy, we can proceed when the board is ready into the FGOC departments.
Thank you. Before we do that, let me just check in with board colleague Supervisor Chavez. And before Supervisor Chavez speaks, let me just ask the clerk of the board, do we have any speakers on item number 5, which is simply to receive that report? We do not. Supervisor Chavez, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the context. That's really helpful as we think about how we proceed. I want to ask a couple of questions just about the economics of what you've laid out, and then I want to ask just a couple of questions about what the implications of them are. So as it relates to this economic environment we're in, have we done our own analysis of what the implications of this are, these issues relative to the communities that we serve? And in particular, what I was thinking about is, as you were showing the median house price, you know, what's not on here, but I'm sure we could show it, is the cost of childcare, the cost of a lot of the services that are needed to live here, and that could give us a picture both for people who are on the higher income, what does their wheel of expenditure look like, and people on the lower income, which is a lot of folks that we provide services to, and I think may actually help us understand the implications and getting ready for the downturn. Do we have a tool that we use like that today?
I think there are. I think the answer is no for something brought at a high level, but each department and many of our systems obviously use a lot of metrics and closely watch how changes in the economy are affecting, again, cost of services, the impacts to cost of living for those that are here. And it's one of the reasons why we share the data and share a forecast for all those indicators so they can contemplate them in their analysis as well.
I think that just this is a recommendation more for my colleagues for us to consider, is that when we in the future are having discussions about the strategies we're using, I think it would be really important to understand both, again, very, very generally, what it means to live here. And in particular, I think if you look at, again, let me just go back to this wheel, how much we spend on transportation, how much we spend on housing, how much we spend on childcare, and how much is spent on education. Those are some, I think, indicators of what the stresses are that families are going through here. And frankly, I think that may be irrespective of income level, except for the very wealthy, in terms of the kinds of pressures that have to be considered. I think it would help us, particularly as we think about policy making. Part of what sparked my attention, even listening to today, was I was listening to a podcast about the economy, and one of the things it was talking about was the increasing spike in childcare costs. And in California, as we're trying to make childcare quality childcare, that will absolutely increase the cost again, and that I think will have implications for much of our workforce, along with the people who we serve. So I'll give some more thought to that. My second question is, you talked a little bit about the cost of housing and the response, and I'm not so much on the response, but I'm wondering if part of our analysis also needs to take into account the number of jobs created and the lack of housing created and the implications of that. Because for us, I think the amount of time people are spending on the road has both a very, it's a very real cost, I think, to living here as well. But I'm wondering, was there any thoughts that you had about the implications of both the cost of housing and even with the cost slowing down, I mean, lowering the availability of housing isn't going to go up dramatically.
Certainly, that's been that imbalance between housing unit development not keeping up with job growth during this economic expansion for the last 7-8 years is what has led to the sharp rise in cost of housing, and median home price, and that's what's kind of causing this. Some limitations on how much further we can go as far as local growth. The price has been driven to such an extent, and that it's becoming a barrier to further economic growth. And we believe that's why we're seeing this leveling off of prices.
So let me just talk about the two just policy implications I wanted to raise with my colleagues. One is, as it appears to me, as you're talking about the availability of general fund dollars, that one of the concerns that I have is that as we're looking at state legislation, and any state legislation that looks at igniting redevelopment really impacts our general fund dramatically. And so I really appreciate you putting out the bubble around what we're spending our current Measure A dollars, because that's really our only flexible funding. And what we're saying with that flexible funding is we're already committing that flexible funding to a main priority for us. But the implications of any kind of change of property taxes for us could really harm our overall programming. And I mostly just say that for my colleagues as people come to lobby us about what they're interested in. I have really tried to share with people how we're spending money, now. I think that's just really important. And I'm sure you all are watching that, especially James. James is like a little mother duck over there, making sure nothing happens to that money. But are you worried about that as an implication and a risk for us in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. the dissolution of RDAs and has probably generated approximately $180 million additional a year.
Wow.
That the county's been able to put back into the community services and improvement efforts. And so if there was a reversal of that back to RDAs of the past, that would mean a very large cut in services and support to the community if that were to happen.
So the one last, just maybe this is more of a comment than a question, but the other issue that I'm really concerned about is that we have a high interest locally in expanding services, particularly around prevention, around child care. I know Supervisor Wasserman has raised a really high interest in us investing in agricultural land. And what I hear you saying is we're not going to grow. We're going to really focus on performance. And my pointed question to you is we're not going to grow within the current budget. And do you see, and based on what you're saying, I also hear you saying we're not going to have more money for growth, and so this next kind of 10 years is really going to be, I'm looking at this as a 10-year chunk, is really going to be focused on drilling down and around performance.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the reasons to push more on metrics and reflection of our current services and current use of resources, so we can be as efficient and effective with the resources that we've had. But, and so if you can imagine a pie, we're going to try to be more efficient with the pie, but don't necessarily see the pie growing,
right,
like we've seen in the last 5-6 years.
So one thing I would just say is reading through the budget book, with the additions and even some things that you all didn't say yes to, it was hard for me to understand the outcome of the requests in terms of our performance. And so what I'm wondering is there a framework around that performance that you see evolving over the next couple of years? And if so, what is that?
Well, we see it by our vision for further developing what we call measures of success, but they're the performance measurements and tying it to broader strategies, not only at the department level, but also just within our systems. And so we have data to help drive decision-making, how best to use what limited resources that we're going to have.
And how would that be public? How is that a public tool, a tool that the board would have access to and the community would have access to?
Yeah, that's part of that vision as well, is getting that data shared quarterly and have it broadly shared, recognizing there'll be a lot of conversation around data, usefulness, context, value, caveats. And we believe that's going to be healthy dialogue as we get into a period of time where we need to be very thoughtful about how we're using what resources we have.
Thank you very much, Joe.
Supervisor Wasserman, your light is on, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Greg, thank you for your report. Thank you for your forecasting. Thank you for your 30,000-foot view, if you would. On the things that you're projecting. I'm thinking back over the last few years, and I remember when sales tax used to be deductible for people. I remember when credit card interest used to be deductible for people. I remember before this last federal tax reform, where all of our property taxes and all of our state sales taxes and all of our mortgage interest was deductible, and we're losing those things. As far as housing goes, Supervisor Chavez even brought up child care. What I'm seeing a continuation of is there's more demand than supply. And demand, for me, in the supply-demand equation has always been the biggest driver. And as long as there is more demand for something than supply, the people providing tend to raise the price. It's like gas in the desert, if you will. And the vicious circle is, well, it's not even popular to say, but as wages go up, then people who own property feel their tenants can afford more. And when higher priced jobs come into the county, people who own property feel they can afford more. And then when people come in and need more child care, then child care costs. I mean, it's all connected. And to find that happy median is so hard to do. I don't want to go back to recessionary times. I don't want to go back to when one-bedroom apartments were $1,200 a month, when there wasn't traffic jams. I don't want to go back to that. And I also don't want to get stuck in inflationary times. And a whole lot of that, if not all of it, is outside of our control here at the Board of Supervisors. And so what I'm going to be looking for is ways not to increase the cost of living to people here in Santa Clara County. I'm going to be looking for ways through all of our department heads, administration, and staff to provide the services that the county is expected to provide in the way of public health and public safety, and this ties into what you said, in the most cost-efficient, practical way possible. And I think as we continue to do our jobs, that wherever possible, we continue to add to our reserves, restoring the reserve. When I first got here, we had 2 weeks of payroll. It was all the cash that we had left. Now we've restored our payroll. So I'm proud of this board and our predecessors for using the good times to restore reserves. And those reserves, for lack of a better name, are rainy day reserves. So I hope that we continue with the status quo, doing what we're expected to do, not expanding our mission more than necessary, not increasing the cost to people in Santa Clara County, but to do what it's our job to do. And at the same time, I hope the city does their job and the state does their job and the federal government, but we don't vote on their boards. So I appreciate your very realistic look at where things are now and from a county perspective where you see our revenue to be. And I want to make sure that we stay the course, providing the services we're expected to provide in the best way we can. And I think the team we have now, this Board of Supervisors, this administration, and especially the department heads and the 20,000 plus people that work for us, continue doing what we're doing. I'm not one who's crazy about ups and downs, and we're not in any position to take any big risks. So I thank you for your guidance in this area.
Thank you. Let me see if there are any other comments or questions on the item number 5, which is simply to receive the report. If not, then I will simply ask if there's any objection to unanimous consent on item number 5, which is to receive the report. And in the absence of any objection, we'll deem the item accepted on a unanimous basis. Thank you very much. That does take us to item number 6, which is to review the county executive's fiscal year 2019-2020 recommended budgets for departments reporting to the Finance and Government Operations Committee. Let me first check with the clerk to see if we have any cards on any of these items. And as I indicated I would earlier, I also want to turn to the committee chair, which in this instance is Supervisor Cortese. We do have just 2 cards. Supervisor, would you like to tee it up a little, or would you like to hear it from the 2 speakers first?
I'll be brief.
Please, go right ahead.
This pages 46 and 47 of the budget layout, the primary departments and budget units that report to FGOC or get policy guidance from the committee. So I would just direct folks there, with the one caveat that when you're looking at some of these departments, a primary example would be the Office of County Executive. You definitely need to take a closer look at all the subcategories of work that are being done within that, because they aren't necessarily all related or congruous, and I'm sure we'll hear about that during the course of the budget process. That's all I have to say, and thank you for the opportunity to tee it up.
Thank you, Supervisor. We do have 2 cards on item number 6, one from Sujatha Venkatraman and one from Marie Bernard. Why don't we ask you 2 to come on up and share your thoughts at this time. We do set aside up to 2 minutes for comments on these items.
Thank you, Supervisors. My name is Sujatha Venkatraman. I'm from West Valley Community Services. Today I'm representing the Emergency Assistance Network agencies. I'm here to speak on the Office of Supportive Housing's Housing Specialist and the Homeless Prevention Emergency Assistance Funds. It was a pilot project, and it was recommended by Supervisor Smidian, and we are one of the agencies that receive this funding. The reason for having this pilot was to work with clients who are coming to us with rent increases, who are paying more than 70% of their income as rent, having landlord issues, to have a specialist work with them to mitigate some of these issues. The housing specialist's job is to work with the landlords when there is an eviction situation, to educate the landlord that eviction costs for them as well as the client. And we have the emergency assistance funds to give for any rent increases, so support that with any back payment of the rent. We've done a lot of workshops for the clients, and the other primary job of the housing specialist is to find affordable housing. If you look at the National Equity Atlas, if clients are paying more than 30% of their income as rent, they're at rent burden. But the reality of clients who come to the emergency assistance network is they are paying 70% of their income as rent. So having a housing specialist has really helped clients stay in housing, stay in Santa Clara County, and work through these issues of rent increases. So one of my recommendations is for you to please relook at the budget and see if the other 4 agencies that is not getting the housing specialist to help support. And in that way, the entire network will have a housing specialist. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me invite our next speaker up.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is Marie Bernard, Sunnyvale Community Services. As Sujatha mentioned, we are asking for full funding for the entire network. You just received a copy of where the housing specialists, which have been funded by the county for the past 2 years, are. And as you'll see, there's some holes in the safety net in our county. The housing specialists are indeed a critical part of the safety net for the low-income people in our county. They proactively reach out to landlords, and in fact, we just had our annual celebration of landlords at our agency, and thank you to Supervisor Simidian for signing a citation to one of our awardees. We work with the landlords so that they have the encouragement and the support to take the risk to rent to someone with an eviction notice. We work with them so that if there is an issue that they have with a tenant whom we've helped place there, that they have someone having their back, as well as, of course, the low-income people that we work with day in and day out. A typical housing specialist will be able to help up to 48 families a year with homelessness prevention or rapid rehousing. And they're part of the network that it takes, the village, takes to keep people housed and to move people into housing. We regularly case manage people from the North County shelter. It's going to grow to 175 beds. We recently housed a veteran who had been homeless for over a year, a man who had had income. Because of the loss of his income, he was homeless since 2017. He came to us as a referral. We are moving him into housing for the first time in over a year next month. And it took a lot of work of our collected participation across many different people. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Bernard, just before we step away, my understanding from the 2 cards we have, colleagues, is that both sets of comments are with respect to item 6E.
6E, correct.
In specific. Thank you again.
And the net we're asking for is $256,000 of additional funding. Thank you.
Thank you again. All right. Then now, Mr. Ituria or Dr. Smith, I can turn back to you all and say, I believe we are ready for you to march us through item 6 and its various subparts.
A little bit about the process here. Mr. Ituria is going to go through each department, budget unit. Well, they're not all budget units. Each department, one by one, give you a summary of the requests that were recommended. Will be here available for questions.
And just colleagues and staff, so you know, it would be my inclination after each subpart here, A, B, C, D, E, and so on, just to lean forward and say comments or questions on each, rather than go through the entire list and then go back to something that we heard about half an hour, 45 minutes ago. Okay? Mr. Ituria, go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. We will begin with the recommended budget for special programs and reserves. The recommended budget for special programs and reserves is $234 million. Reserves are recommended for anticipated costs that need further definition before the board is asked to authorize more specific spending, including hospital integration, jail reform, Voters' Choice Act, Information Technology Career Compass, healthcare, information technology projects, and other budget impacts. Administration is eyeing approximately $1 million, give or take, of the federal and state budget impact reserve towards implementation of what comes out of the employee child care assessment research. Also, existing Object 1 appropriation or salaries and benefits appropriation is being eyed for this as well. Since we do not know what kind of solutions or magnitude of cost may be identified through that research, administration is not yet determined a particular reserve type or amount to reserve for employee child care assistance. Other than that, if there are any questions on special programs before we move into the discussion for the general fund contingency.
Comments or questions? Supervisor? Nope. I have one quick one, and if you want, we can do it later in the list, but we have a set aside here for the Voters' Choice Act, yes?
Yes.
Won't come as a surprise to you. I've expressed concern before about the challenge of the Voters' Choice Act implementation. Was there any way we could, how secure do we feel that this particular amount is the right amount, an adequate amount? Or were we actually able to determine how much we think we're going to need, or are we sort of doing the best we can in terms of an estimate, given the fact that we haven't done this before?
Yep. At this point, this is a ballpark. There are a few variables in play, including what's being proposed by the governor for funding as well, and including in the May revise that was just released last week, proposed to increase funding to counties to help implement the Voters' Choice Act. So kind of what's at play here is trying to get our best estimate of what this county share will be for that to be able to supplement what the general fund is out of the reserve. So that's one of the reasons why it's a reserve in some play. And then also working closely with the Register of Voters to develop an implementation plan that would to be brought back to the board for conversation before actually appropriating out of that reserve. So everyone is well aware of the implementation, the costs, if there's any risks or not, there's dialogue about it.
And if it turned out we needed $500,000, $1 million, or $2 million more, where would we most likely go to find such funding?
At that point, then we could take a look at it, or some other repurposing other reserves, or perhaps the contingency. And it's also possible the board may want to take a look at mid-year to see if other appropriation within the Register of Voters budget, just it doesn't have enough flexibility to handle what's needed or not.
Thank you. I want to underscore, as I have in the past, concern about outreach. I do think when folks have been used to doing things a certain way for half a century or more, in some cases among some of the older voters, this is going to be a dramatic change, and it's not always going to be top of mind for people, and therefore tough to engage their attention. And so we'll look forward to seeing how it goes, but I want to make sure that we don't short that effort as we go forward. Anything else from colleagues? I will not repeat all that when we get to the Registrar of Voters. That's the good news. If not, then we'll consider the report presented and received, and we'll go on to B.
Okay. Next item is the recommended appropriation for general fund contingency. The recommendation for $163.6 million establishes the contingency reserve at 5% of the general fund revenue, net of pass-through revenue, consistent with Board of Supervisor policy. And if there are no questions on that, we'll move right on to the
Comments
Board
or
of Supervisors.
questions? Hang on.
Actually, I do have one question, just very broadly on contingencies. I know that we have this reserve policy at 5%. What I could not recall was if there are a series, do we have a separate reserve for the hospitals right now? And is that what we had voted on a while ago, that $30 million?
Well, there are a couple of reserves for related to the healthcare system. One was at mid-year. There was a reserve established by the Board of Supervisors to help with the community hospital integration, and much of that has already been accessed to help implement HealthLink, which is currently being implemented. There's nearly $5 million of that left. The recommended budget also recommends supplementing that with another $20 million. We believe that's what's going to be needed for additional equipment and one-time costs for that integration as well. So
that's in addition to the $30 million we voted on a while ago that I think was mostly for capital costs.
Yes, that would have just been for capital costs.
So
yeah.
Okay.
And then separate from that, there's also a recommended $20 million ongoing reserve just to serve as a contingency for potential loss of revenue, to be frank, with concerns about federal funding reliability, supplemental funding reliability for the healthcare system.
So I know we were looking at the supplemental funding. Were we also, and actually this might, my second question, if it's better to have this conversation under the health and hospital system, I'm fine with that. But I'm also a little just mindful of the weakening of the Affordable Care Act and wanting to make sure that, as I think about the $20 million we've described, is that supposed to also handle whatever madness we get at a federal level relative to the Affordable Care Act?
No, we have some set aside in this recommended budget, some reserves for federal and state contingencies, but nowhere near the amount that would be needed if there was true damage to the Affordable Care Act. So if that actually happened, we'd have to go back to the drawing board.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other comments or questions on this item? If not, we'll go on to the next.
And the next budget to review is for the Board of Supervisors budget unit. The recommended appropriation for the Board of Supervisors budget is $10.2 million, and this maintains the current level budget for fiscal year 1920. And if there are no questions on the Board of Supervisors, we'll move on to the Clerk of the Board budget.
Let me just confirm. No comments or questions. Next item, please.
Next item is for the Office of the Clerk of the Board. And the recommended budget for the Office of the Clerk of the Board is $10.8 million. And this also is the amount needed to maintain the current level budget for fiscal year 1920. And I see that we do have, we are available to address any questions the board may have regarding the Office of the Clerk of the Board recommended budget.
Colleagues? None on this item. Thank you.
Okay, next we'll move on to the recommended budget for the Office of the County Executive. The recommended budget is an appropriation of $240.1 million, and this provides resources to improve the whistleblower program, enhancing security and safety for county facilities, for the privacy office, and for developing and implementing jail reforms, resources for the diesel-free at 33, the Silicon Valley 2.0, as well as the maintaining the County Climate Coalition. Further, it adds resources to develop and implement labor standards enforcement programs, supports the Employee Engagement Survey, as well as support for the Privacy and Information Security Office, provides leaders roundtable events in support of the LGBTQ community, establishes the Transgender Economic Empowerment Initiative, and enhances the Reentry Resource Center education resources, as well as supports the Census 2020 division, augments the Juvenile Dependency Advocacy Program, allocates resources for cloud computing, cybersecurity, optimizing their learning management and supporting housing bonds efforts, increasing access to clients for financial assistance to eliminate barriers to obtain housing, increases services supportive housing, as we mentioned earlier in the introduction. Further, it recommends transfer of administration oversight of the Office of Veteran Services to SSA, and transfers the Information Security Office to Security Services to the County Executive's Office. And at this point, if there are any questions from the Board of Supervisors regarding the County Executive's Office recommended budget?
I see Supervisor Ellenberg and then Supervisor Wasson.
Thank you. The first question that I have is really about the measures of success. I'm looking, Dr. Smith, your responsibilities are obviously immense and very broad, but the only success measures both have to do with housing, which is certainly important, but I'm curious about the bigger picture and how you're looking to track areas as broad as, county administration and external partnerships, employee safety, and all of the other myriad things that fall under your role.
I'll try to answer that. As Greg mentioned earlier, with measures of success reporting, we are still, after 2 years, working on trying to make it a cohesive report. And so each department was asked to pick a measure that they thought was measurable, that they could actually act upon, that they thought was a reasonable overlay of their entire service. And since the county exec's office does so many different things, we chose something that we thought we could actually report and as a group have some overwhelming interest in. So we still have a lot more work to do, is what it boils down to. We
got it. Then
there were, if you look, as you well have done, look through a number of our services. Many of them are driven, how should I say it, by the Board of Supervisors. And so we didn't want to pick things as measures of success that we didn't have some measure of control within the department about, so that we could actually measure our performance.
That makes sense. I noted, and I would love to have further conversations in general about the new measures of success component of the budget and how we might get a little bit more specific and actionable on that. So it looks to me from this report as though the priorities coming from your office are housing, privacy, and labor standards enforcement. Is that a fair reflection?
Right now, those are top of the list, but they do change every 2 weeks.
I was thinking childcare is not on that list yet.
Yeah, that'll be there soon.
Okay. Give me just a second. I had one other question I wanted to ask about this part. Oh, the juvenile dependency advocacy program.
Yes.
There's a one-time funding augmentation there, but my understanding is that the state cut funding 4 years ago. It's been an inventory item. Now it was added to the budget, but presuming this is ongoing, why is it just a one-time add?
I can speak to that.
Okay,
This has been a close partnership with the courts because the state funding was cut to the courts, and the Board of Supervisors has been an advocacy partner with the courts to get that funding restored, and has been providing year by year gap funding during that effort. There's good news, though, in that some of the message from the advocacy efforts going through the governor's budget did include more funding, and that's the reason why there is less funding needed to close that gap this year than in the past. And in addition to that, there is work regarding access to Title IV federal funding to where there's a very good chance that this will be the last gap year needed, and that they may be able to get full adequate funding by getting 4E participation. So that's the reason why it's only been 1 year at a time, is because there's been a belief that we can get that funding restored through different efforts, and so far those efforts are beginning to prevail.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And Mr. Wasserman, before we move to you, I think Supervisor Chavez has a point on this.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one point on this, and that is that we had asked staff also annually to write a letter reminding the state that we were doing something that they were supposed to be doing. And it was really a mantra that Mike has had about, like, when we have to step in, which we absolutely had to in this instance, was to make sure that we didn't frankly start to take on a responsibility that really belonged to the state. So I appreciate, that's great news, and appreciate that you caught that.
Supervisor Chavez, a follow-up about that. So is it a mandate such that when they start funding again, we will get back years reimbursed to us?
Because it's never been a county responsibility. It's a local court responsibility. So it's really between the Superior Court of California and the governor's office and the state legislature for what is an adequate funding amount for that responsibility. This was just the county stepping in to help during an interim period while they work that out.
Although, as we properly should, but that's the point, that if it's not our responsibility, and I like, Mike, that you had made sure that we let the state continuously know that we're not forgetting about this. But if there is an opportunity or even a worthwhile attempt to essentially submit an invoice or a remit, this is what we've been funding.
Well, let me just say, part of the reason, and I think this was actually your idea, I think, James, that part of the reason we wrote the first letter was that there is supposed to be a mechanism in the wheels of California to repay on occasion. And I think that I think we were all just not hopeful at all, but wanted to at least leave our stake in the ground saying, you should do this, and it should stay your responsibility. I also think it's helping, by doing that, it's helping our folks advocate at the table, because while we're getting some money, which I really appreciate, the way the courts are debating how they're making investments, Santa Clara County statewide has actually not been on the winning end until more recently. And I think, so I think whatever noise we can make, I do think it helps our advocates.
Cool. Good. Thank you.
Maybe I can join in a little bit. Past governor was very adversarial with the courts and intentionally cut them vigorously and viciously. He's not there now, so I can say that. The May revised budget from the current governor was actually much more favorable, and so we can anticipate there will be a more favorable trend. But as you say, Supervisor, over the years, Santa Clara courts were really punished for doing a good job in previous years, and so we're hoping that we can get back to a stable structure.
Thank you all, and thank you, Supervisor Wasserman, for your patience while we let that conversation play out. Now to you, sir.
Thank you. No worries. Through the chair, if I may, to Dr. Smith. Dr. Smith, the question I had was regarding the 15 positions being transferred from TSS to your office to make up the Information Security Office. And I can ask that question on this item here, our package page 62, where it mentions it, or I can do it under 6J, which is the TSS report. Which would you prefer?
Now's good.
Fire away. Thank you. So my question to you is an understanding. I know there's been a lot of consolidation, attempts at consolidation from various departments with IT to TSS, and then I read this mostly in 6J, where 15 positions being transferred from TSS to your office for our Information Security Office. And I just wondered what the rationale between you and Ann and everything else for this. Are those positions actually, I would assume they're not going to actually be up on the 11th floor.
No, they're not going to actually.
There, but your office will be paying for them?
Right, and we'll be directing them carefully. And really the policy policy reason for this is because information security is really a critical risk that the entire county suffers from right now. And so we wanted to be absolutely positive that we were leading the way in being secure throughout the entire county and making sure that we have enterprise solutions that work for all the county departments and all the county systems, and raise the
anti-hacking bar. Sure.
Intention about this issue, because it's not really just a technical issue. As you well know, the board well knows that, you know, humans interact with the technology. Yep. And if humans aren't respectful of security, you can have all the technology in the world and you still won't have a secure system.
No, I totally understand the reason for us doing it. That wasn't my question or my issue, if you would, with it at all. The 15 people, I understand, probably you and Ann worked that out, what was necessary. Why is it in your budget instead of TSS? That work?
Because of the reporting structure.
Reporting to you?
To us. Directly to the county exec.
Okay, and does that come through Ann and TSS?
No. Because the security is more than just technology. So it's aligning where the security risks are to the entire county, not just the technology risk.
Okay, I saw the ITT, so I was just thinking technology, but maybe I need to learn more about that subject.
Yeah.
Before I go back to Supervisor Ellenberg, Supervisor Wasserman, these are questions that I'm often asking because, as you know, I have been pushing on privacy issues since my return to the board 6 years ago. Some of those issues are, quote, privacy issues. Some of them are data security issues, and some of them are smushed together. And then the question is, for, you know, many of these issues, who should be reporting to whom, under what structure? Sometimes we're talking with our chief privacy officer. Sometimes we're talking with our chief information security officer. Sometimes we're talking with the head of the technology systems and solutions, and so on and so forth. And then, just to make it more complicated, of course, sometimes we're talking about the registrar of voters operation and how do we keep all of that secure as well. So I do think these reporting relationships are important, but I'm sort of also open to the notion that there are a lot of different ways to structure the organization to make sure that the technical expertise and the policy direction get harnessed in the same place. But
Sure, I appreciate that. The reason I brought it up, my staff and I, when we were reading it, I saw the 15 people. I saw the ITT to TSS. We have so many acronyms now, especially this time of the year. I saw that, and I saw in the other staff reports where there were people from the various departments in IT moving to TSS, and I saw these people, in my mind, moving from TSS to CEO. And I just wanted to more fully understand, and it was mentioned in 2 of these 15 items we're dealing with today. So I wanted to more fully understand the rationale for the number of people under what office and what it all incorporated. So thank you all for that.
Maybe
I have that understanding.
Try another hit at it. The goal is to make a centrally led IT system, which means basically that the enterprise systems, those systems that go across all departments, you know, like email, finance, all those kinds of things, are run, operated, controlled through TSS, and the ones that are department specific, we're now calling them federated. We don't have a constitution that says we're a federal government.
No, but I'm thinking of declaring June JEM, J-E-M, for Jargon Elimination Month. I just think we
right. Anyhow, the federated systems are controlled, operated by the departments who have a special interest in them. And obviously there are some that cross borders and have relationships that cross borders. So we're trying to have a centrally led system, not centrally controlled system. But with regard to CISO, it's, I shouldn't have said that.
Why don't we?
Security officer, it's important that it be a countywide effort.
Thank you, and I'm good with moving on.
Thank you. So, Appreciate the inquiry. Mr. Wasserman, now I'm back to Supervisor Ellenberg.
Thank you. I did have one more comment based on the public comments, and I apologize to my colleagues and to everyone if you saw me dashing in and out a bunch of times. I am dealing also with a family crisis this afternoon, and I'm trying hard to focus and be present. And I wanted to address the public comments on the Emergency Assistance Network sites, and particularly given the described emphasis on affordable housing in the CEO's office. I would like us to consider expanding the number of housing specialists, given the growing need for housing assistance. There is an RP. There's likely to be an RFP for this item after the coming year, and we've seen early success. I believe this was originally a budget inventory item from Supervisors in 2015 for ongoing funding to pilot the housing specialist program at 4 of our 7 Emergency Assistance Network agencies. And because that's working and we have good results and the need continues to increase, I'd like to recommend that we expand that RFP to all 7 of the network sites.
We'll look into it.
Thank you.
Anything else on this item? Supervisor Chavez.
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to just say, I think that, just to pick up on the technology piece, I actually think it is really appropriate to have something that when we're trying to change the culture of the organization, I think having that body of work coming from the county exec's office is really critical. And I think once we feel like we're in a more stable place around this, because I think, Joe, you really brought something to the county that was very new and really deeply cultural changing as it relates to us thinking about our cybersecurity and infrastructure in a much more deep and meaningful way. And as a matter of fact, I was at a meeting where people were asking a question about cybersecurity, and I said, "Oh, to our officer, you should talk to our folks." And they said, "Oh yeah, you're the resource for all the cities in the county." And then some of the cities that didn't know their cities were talking to us were very jealous of other cities who were talking to our cybersecurity people. So my only point is that it's got big potential. So I appreciate the strategy that you're using. What I'd like to do is, and I apologize to my colleagues, but I want to go through a few of these relatively quickly and just share some thoughts I have about the work that's coming forward. Particularly, let me start with reentry. I think that the more success the reentry work has, the more we have people who want to be part of reentry who were not part of our original reentry programming. They're outside of AB 109. And so I do want to just emphasize how important I think the community workers that we need to get people really linked to community colleges and really to focus on jobs is going to be. And so I'm hoping also, Dr. Smith, as you think about the budget, that if you could help me as we get through this process better understand the investments that you're choosing to or not choosing to make at this point in reentry, because I'm thinking it's honestly it's the direction that you would like us to go, which is to really have that be more expansive to respond to the needs of a broader set of the community. So just to put that out, and also to say that I know that as we're kind of looking at stabilizing ourselves, that one of the challenges is with that stabilization is that we have some plans in the works to already expand the Justice Center and this campus without a real strong funding stream attached to that. One of the early areas that we're going to need to, I think we're going to have to take a new look at is better refining the vision around reentry to determine whether or not it should go in the Public Safety and Justice building, or whether or not we're really looking at an expansion in its current footprint or somewhere on this side that's connected to public safety and justice, but disconnected enough that we have more people accessing it. So that's something I'll be interested when the final budget comes back at better understanding. As it relates to the jail reform work, we're adding 2 positions here to develop and implement jail reform, and I just want to thank your staff very much for explaining a little bit about these, the positions. I would like, as we look at the final budget, just to better understand the bodies of work that will be housed under, Martha's team and how these jobs really help enhance that work, because I'm still a little bit, unclear about that. There's a bunch of other really great stuff here. I'm excited about the work you're doing with the Office of Sustainability, and the consumer and environmental protection work is just very exciting. With the Office of Women's Policy, we have worked really hard, and I know that Mr. Campos and the team at OWP have really been working hard on the Women's Equality 2020 Leadership Council. And we have some remaining funds in that pool, but I'm wondering if what the thinking was around not responding to the $150,000 for one-time funding for this next year of activities, and if that's something that you were looking at embedding into another body of work, or you had concerns about it, or didn't think that we were ready for more resources.
At this point, we felt the office wasn't ready for more resources, but that's not to say it won't be ready soon. So at this point, it was just a matter of, are you ready yet? I should have also mentioned to the board in general that for questions that you have, we will certainly come back to you. If we can't give you a satisfactory answer today or individually at the workshop meetings, we'll come back with off-agenda answers that further explain.
That's
So
really helpful. Thank
I should
you.
have mentioned that at the beginning.
Thank you. For the Veteran Services Division and moving it over to Social Services, that sounds like a very good alignment of activity. And I'm wondering are you feeling like the office is strong and steady and able to make that move? Is that why that's happening now? And if so, the question I would ask is really kind of a question that Supervisor Ellenberg asked, which is, what are the benchmarks that you now see that you feel like we can move it on and it's going to be fine in SSA that we should be looking at?
Well, Veterans Services went through some difficult 2 years, and we were looking carefully at how we could best support them, and the majority, well, basically the vast majority of what they do is eligibility for benefits, which is different than social services, but many of the veterans also have social services benefits. So having the nexus of being mixed, we felt was a much better administrative support structure for them than being in the county exec's office, where frankly we're not connected in that way.
Do you think it's possible to co-locate eligibility workers in the current veterans?
Possible. We're not recommending that right now, but we're trying to see how we best facilitate sort of a one-stop shopping center.
Got it. I would be really interested in understanding how this unfolds, but also whether or not it does make sense around co-location. As I've learned more about what our benefits our eligibility workers have to learn relative to paperwork, it's appalling and not something that's easy to teach. And so co-location, I think we've seen a lot of success with co-location at some of our partner organizations, particularly as we deal with people who are homeless and getting housing.
Right.
So it might be worth us taking a look at.
Right.
Thank you. And then I just have one more kind of observation for this area, and that is that I know, and I want to thank Greg and your staff for giving us so much feedback on this, but the AB, I understand we don't have an AB 109 reserve, and I kept referring to a reserve as we were dipping into the no reserve. And does that mean that the state's going to stop are you terrified of the state not funding us anymore? Sorry, Javier, I hear you out there.
Well, the concern that we have with the AB 109 funding is that there's been very slow revenue growth from the state compared to the year-over-year cost growth for the services that are being funded by AB 109. And we see that through a declining fund balance and the fund that those are getting and received. So we're just being much more cautious about recommending new investments of AB 109 funding because of that decline. And we're taking a look at the latest estimates that were just released by the Governor's Department of Finance and their May revise. And based on that, I think we're going to be coming back and further reducing our estimates next year, perhaps by about $3 million. We're still working on that, but between now and the hearing, we'll get that solidified. So the concern is that the revenue growth isn't keeping up with the cost growth for the operations that this county funds with AB 109 resources.
And I think maybe the other question for us, again, is as we're taking a look at our reentry programming, thinking more about how that connects to other programs that we're doing in the county to determine what that will look like long term. I am nervous about one piece of this in particular, and that is that it does appear to me that there were a lot of issues that the previous governor was very focused on and excited about. And while I'm really excited about our new governor's interest in housing and childcare and all those things that I care deeply about, I'm also a little bit nervous that the gas is taken off of programs that we really extended ourselves as a county to provide in partnership with the state. And this feels like one of them. So thank you. Thank you.
Going to go to Supervisor Cortese next, and then I have just a brief comment as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Just one segue on Supervisor Chavez's on the veterans. So I assume there'll be, and maybe it's a bad assumption, will there be a physical transition of the FTE?
The office will stay where it is. The people will stay where they are. The supervision will change.
Okay, and is that the indefinite plan at this point?
At this point.
Okay.
We'll see how it works, and if it doesn't work, we'll take it back.
Yeah, I just wanted to suggest something that's been often on the table over the years, is that if it turns out that there's a physical consolidation with SSA because they have the facilities to accommodate, that the community-based agencies that serve the veterans be looped in at that time with the possibility of them having desk space in that kind of an environment. So you truly get not only an internal one-stop with SSA and our services and housing and so forth, but also cut down on the amount of travel a lot of these veterans are doing, crisscrossing the county to go from one place to another to get community-based agencies to assist them. I was at an event over the weekend.
Good point.
Supervisor Ellenberg had a Vietnam veteran walk up and say, please, can you help consolidate some of these agencies because it's hard to get around to all of them. I think they basically need a desk, in order to accommodate people.
We've been debating back and forth. It's not in the budget because it's not ready for prime time, but exactly what you're talking about. There has been discussion that the Silver Creek campus, which we just purchased, is really right down the street from the Veterans Administration building. There's a possibility there of co-locating a lot of services. It's not centrally located. That's a potential problem. So at this point, we're debating the issues that you're talking about within staff.
I'm glad to hear those issues are not being lost and they're on the table. Under asset and economic development, another thing that's been often on the table for a while, and there's been some responses to past referrals, is sort of a greater centralization of real estate activities in the county. And I just would like to ask, not for a big explanation right now, but that between now and budget adoption, we get a little deeper dive in that area, get an update on where we're at. I know we launched a process to start trying to pull things together in that area, and it just seems like it'd be a good time to get an update on that.
Will do.
And then, question, I know that we installed a legal PIO in this budget, meaning the county executive's budget. I'm not sure, I just want to make sure that's still here and or it moved over to legal. We haven't gotten there yet. And I believe that would be under the public affairs budget. The public affairs piece of the county executive's budget, as I recall, was augmented to include a PIO that would be dedicated exclusively to county council. When I say legal, I meant county council. I apologize. There's a lot of legal in the county, but county council.
Right. Go ahead.
Yes, in last year's budget, the board did approve the addition of a position. It's located in the office of the county executive within the Office of Public Affairs. That position is not currently filled.
But the appropriation is still here. It's not filled
The
yet.
appropriation is in the county executive's office budget.
It's still there. We didn't take it out.
It's appropriated. Is it
Yes.
filled? Is it filled? Did you say it's
It
not
is
filled?
not filled.
Okay, so in the status of that, it's posted.
Yeah, we're recruiting 80-plus positions in the county executive's office, so it's on the list. But
Okay.
it's I don't know exactly where it is in the hiring process.
Well, it'd be great to get a little more of an explanation on where it is in process in terms of posting versus hiring versus onboarding between now and we adopt the budget. Thank you.
Okay.
That's all I had.
We'll do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. And just before we leave this item, two quick observations on the privacy front. Dr. Smith, thank you again to your entire team for sort of the progress we have made. I continue to think we probably need additional resources on the privacy front, but I also know we're having trouble, frankly, recruiting and filling some of the positions that are there. So I'm accepting of the fact that this is not the year until we sort of get the next batch of folks on board. But I just sort of wanted to lay down a marker that we're not there yet, and appreciate the progress that we are making, because I do think we're making really meaningful progress, and thanks to everybody across the various organizations that I described. The other is I just wanted to throw in a Me Too on the housing specialist request that Supervisor Ellenberg mentioned. I heard you. Appreciate the fact you're going to take a look and see if we can make some progress there in making that resource available more broadly. But I thought it might be helpful to you to know that it wasn't just one supervisor asking about it when you were looking. Okay.
Got it. And I just received feedback about the public information officer dedicated to the county council. The position was posted, and we have applications. We're expecting to do interviews later this month.
Great. Thank you all very much. I think that means that we have received item 6E, colleagues, and we're on to 6F, the Office of the Assessor. And I do note that the assessor is with us. Thank you for his patience before we got to his item. Mr. Arturia, do you want to introduce this, and then we'll ask the assessor if he's got anything he'd like to share with us as well?
Certainly. The recommended budget for the Office of Assessor totals $44.4 million. It does add resources to conduct more timely commercial property assessments and business property audits, as well as resources to maintain the residential appraisal software and to modify training resources within the department. And
that's it for now.
That's it for now.
All right, let me see. Mr. Stone, would you like to share a thought or two, or?
We just concur with the recommendations of the county executive.
I believe that's called taking yes for an answer. Okay. Colleagues, any comments or questions on that item? All right. If not, then we'll say thank you both to Mr. Arturia and to the assessor on that. And we'll move on from item 6F to item 6G, which is procurement.
The recommended budget for the procurement department is a total appropriation of $20.7 million. And the recommended actions include adding resources to enhance the centralized procurement, and so they have the resources to negotiate lower cost in goods and services. And at this point, if there are any questions of the board regarding the procurement department budget?
I do have a question about the negotiated savings. Is that a function of timeliness in payment, or is that other factors as well?
The recommended action is to add 4 buyers to improve resources to assist with their ability to go out and negotiate better pricing. And as far as any particulars on that, we can turn to the department.
Thank you. And my question in layman's language is, and what is it we do to persuade somebody that they should give us a better price? They should give us a better price because...
So we use a number of techniques. Teresa Thrillis, for the Deputy Director of Procurement, we use a number of techniques in negotiations. First, this year, earlier, we allowed all of our procurement professionals to take negotiations training classes. So the negotiations can be based on leveraging other options of volume and pure negotiating for better pricing and better cost.
All right. Supervisor Chavez, I see your light is on. Comments or questions on this item?
Yes, thank you. My question was a little more broad, and that is that I know we have a number of initiatives that we push forward around contracting in particular, whether it's the way we manage project labor agreements or any number of things. What I'm wondering is, what is the process that exists right now for policies that get made here to get integrated into your area?
So when the board has a policy or what we call a referral, we look into that. We work closely with OCCM, which is the Office of Countywide Contract Management, and we work with them to see how we can put in a new policy. And we'll look how that works with what we're doing in our implementation. And usually if we have implemented something based on the policy of the board, we also will send out a memo from our Chief Procurement Officer to let everyone know that we've started to implement new process.
How would we know that, the board?
It's reflected in the board approval of modifications to Chapter 5 of the policy manual.
So if we make a referral, and let's say we all vote yes, and for some reason it doesn't get, the action doesn't get picked up by staff, we know that because we didn't take another vote on it to put it in Chapter 5?
No, we track all of the referrals, and we have a strict time schedule to get back to you on the referrals. So if we, from a staff perspective, don't believe that it's a good idea, we'll tell you. But most of the time, we're coming back to you with a implementation of that referral.
Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. I believe we'll consider that item received. All right, on to the next. Office of the County Council.
And the recommended budget for the Office of County Council is $61.2 million, or $61.5 million appropriation. It includes recommended actions to add resources to enhance legal services to county departments, to improve knowledge and support within the office, obtaining legal and expert witness services, facilitating electronic discovery and the California Public Records Act requests. It also provides resources to augment the Independent Defense Counsel Office services. And at this point, if there's any questions of the County Council, he is to my right.
Mr. Williams, anything you want to add in the way of supplementary observation?
Not at this time, no.
Questions or comments, colleagues, for either Mr. Arturia or Mr. Williams?
I have one.
Please.
And this is for Mr. Williams. James, some time ago, the board took an action around the work that we're doing relative to immigration. And one of the recommendations that came out of that, at least a discussion, but I can't remember if it was a referral, was to consider whether or not it made sense to add immigration lawyers to your staff, really to support the ongoing pro bono work that we have had agencies or companies say they'd be interested in, but they're nervous about working with nonprofits and potentially a nonprofit going out of business, and then there being no way to manage the case and how to get fresh information because the cases are more complicated. Is that something that would be appropriate for your office or another office in the organization?
We think it'd be most appropriate for a different office, namely because the county council's office doesn't provide representation to individuals in the community. It provides representation to the county as an entity, as opposed to, say, the public defender's office or other offices that have the authority and scope to represent individuals in individual cases. And so if these folks would be actually working directly on individual cases and their duty of loyalty would be to those individuals as their clients, that's a really different structural setup than the county council's office is designed for.
Thank you.
Supervisor Ellenberg.
Thank you. I think that a theme that you'll hear from me throughout these workshops is really looking at the measures of success. Didn't realize that they were as new as I was, and I'm impressed and glad that we are moving in this direction. And for that matter, for procurement, I had no comments at all because I thought their measures were absolutely on point, actionable, aligned, and very transparent. And with regard to County Council's office, I would like to suggest that we go beyond just the response rate to a little bit more granular data, the number of responses, maybe some information as to whether the surveys, how we're selecting that, how we're getting that information is quantitative or narrative, and whether the surveys themselves allow the department to identify particular areas for improvement when satisfaction is not indicated as high, and whether there's some system that might be built in for accountability for improvement. Again, I know this is new, but while it's fresh, want to put all of these out.
We've been doing departmental surveys for many years. It actually predates the measures of success. It's extraordinarily granular data that is used by the office's management team. The challenge is, for an office, and my philosophy is that, the office's overall goals and priorities are actually established by this board, and those are established through the board's conversations with me and direction to me that are, of course, confidential, closed session discussions in terms of setting the broad priorities.
Right.
What we use the survey results for is not so much priority setting or policy, but to see how responsive we are to kind of daily operational issues. And we have doubled the number of responses received, but the questions do have quite a bit of granularity in terms of different categories. The overall results, except for the two areas that have been noted, are very, very high across the board on all questions.
And I am glad to hear that, and I was referring to the operations of the office as opposed to our satisfaction, which you hear directly from us. Are these surveys reported anywhere outside of your department in any kind of even high-level way?
They are not.
And is that true in general with each department's measures of success? They're used internally but don't get to the level of the board?
Yeah, for the most part, at this point, what's shared is what's published in the recommended budget. There are much more in the way of metrics that are gathered and used throughout the departments, probably thousands of them. And what we're trying to evolve with measures of success is going to have eventually a quarterly publication of those that have usefulness beyond the department. Particularly to engage leadership, including the leadership here with the board, leadership of other county departments, so they can have system-wide considerations, from the data that one particular department's gathering. So we're developing the technology, I guess you could say, for that type of sharing.
I wanted to add one thing is that some departments do report process measurements to the board, like health and hospitals, social services, custody, but those aren't really, in our opinion, measures of success. Those are just measures of process. And so we really are trying to change the way that the departments think about what's successful for them, rather than thinking about, yeah, I did the process, I got 1,000 calls, more from a constituent, client perspective, was that successful? Did that help me somehow? And it's been a slow process, but we will get to the point where we're actually reporting on a regular basis to the board and the public.
Great. I think that's an important piece, not for us to micromanage how the departments are being managed, but to look at overall growth and responsiveness to trends that we don't want to continue. How do we continue to adjust? I think it's a piece that will build confidence in the board, and a lot of our role is really being the representatives in the community to talk about what's being done here. So I like that quarterly reports will be available to us at some point. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. I would just add, Dr. Smith, I was out of the chambers briefly when you were talking about measures of success earlier today on a different item. I, too, share the interest in continuing to grow that effort. Appreciate the progress that's been made. It's not a small culture shift. And looking to Mr. Aturia now, the ability to link those measures of success to the budget document and the budget process so that we can have some conversational, as my colleagues have said in various ways, about, so this is what we were hoping we were funding, and is that actually happening? I think that's helpful. And then, Mr. Williams, since we're on your item, I should just say, good for you for the client satisfaction survey, and I thought, calling out to specific items where you were willing and able to identify an opportunity to up your game a little bit and say, hey, we could do more in these two areas and probably would be good for all parties. All of that was to the good. So unless there are other comments or questions, why don't we, without objection, consider the County Council item duly received, and we'll move on to the next item. Mr. Aturia.
And the next item is the Register of Voters budget. The recommended appropriation for the Registers of Voters is $31.2 million, and this includes actions to add resources to support a new voting system, electronic poll books, improving oversight and accuracy of elections, increases related to the motor voter program, and also resources for oversight of translated election materials. And separate from this budget, we mentioned it earlier when we talked about special reserves, there's also separate reserves recommended for the implementation of the Voters' Choice Act.
Thank you very much. Comments or questions, colleagues? We do have the registrar here. I want to thank her for her presence. Supervisor Chavez?
Thank you. And I am really excited about the work that is being undertaken. And the only question I really wanted to ask is that I know that any mistake that gets made in the Registrar of Voters office has just huge ripple effects. And I always feel for you because it's a typo or something that goes on. And I'm wondering if with all the changes that you have going on in your department, Shannon, you kind of said it to us the other day when you were saying we're taking a number of different aggressive paths on innovation in our area. Do you have the senior staff that you need to do all of that?
Yes, I have some senior staff we're recruiting. We've had a couple of vacancies in the managers that just happened in the last month, so we're recruiting for that. Yes, I feel I have enough senior staff. We've been working on policies and procedures, and appreciate the CEO giving us an additional AMA, Associate Management Analyst, to continue our efforts on those, because documenting the things department-wide, it takes several years to do. So we're making progress on that. And so, yeah, it feels good that we're working on those. I mean, we are human. Like you said, it can be one typo out of, a million words. You have one word that's spelled wrong, it will cause an issue. But yes, we're working on our policies and procedures.
And so mostly right now, you have enough staff, it's just recruiting those empty slots.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Ellenberg.
Thank you. I have some questions about the goals and the report in general. And it appears that the main goal is increased voter turnout, which from a policy end is certainly the community's goal. But my sense of what the ROV should be focused on is well-administered elections, and increased voter turnout will come. That's not something that you can control as much, but really a focus on a timely, accurately, well-administered election process, to me, should show up in the goals. And I note also that this says initiatives being implemented over the next year contribute to at least one, if not both, of ROV's goals. And I can't find what the second expressed goal is, in addition to the increased voter turnout.
I apologize, I didn't have that marked. I believe that's regarding our learning organization, becoming a learning organization. Let me see here. Sorry.
Right. Is there a second goal besides the voter turnout?
Well, our major focus and goals, I 100% agree with you on accuracy of elections. The other one is voter convenience regarding the ability and methods of voting, including accessible voting. We have a remote accessible vote by mail ballot online now for the accessibility community, disabled community to be able to use. So I agree that turnout is not as much in our control as being accurate and conducting elections with integrity.
Okay, good. Under cross-functional teams, you're noting that teams have started to form organically.
Yes.
That makes me a little bit nervous. I would like to think with this significant amount of growth that you've got coming over the next 2 years that this is really being managed and directed. Organic is awesome when it happens, but there's too much at stake here to rely on something that just kind of may flow into action.
I agree. What we meant more with that comment is we made an effort and introduced formal cross-functional teams to our department in our total endeavors to increase morale, increase cooperation and communication and collaboration in the divisions. And out of those CFTs, after that, other divisions just started working together on other projects, and we're carrying on with the CFT kind of process on their own without us being asked. And I agree with the changes coming up. I was telling FGOC the other day, we have just implemented, in the process over several months back, we have implemented 15 new committees just for the Voters' Choice Act, all focusing on different topics. So I do agree with you.
Okay,
maybe I can jump in there.
Sure.
From a countywide perspective, Leslie and Landy have been in charge of our CLT cross-functional team training throughout the county for the last 10 years, and we've in different departments called it different things because different employees like to think of it differently. So in the hospital, oftentimes you'll hear it called a UBT, unit-based team. Social services, they liked the lean approach, so they'll call it a Kaizen team. Nobody's picked ISO 9001, but it's all team-based process learning and process improvement. And we have been recruiting particular individuals in each department, and in that sense choosing them, although it's one of those things where you can't really force people to cooperate with each other. However, it is true that once you get to sort of a critical mass of interest, then things do start happening organically. We find people have started UBT teams that didn't even tell us about them, but they're going and going well. So you'll hear in Health and Hospital Committee, sometimes Amy Carter will give a report. She'll talk about the formal UBTs and then the baby UBTs, which are the ones that started on their own. But same thing's happening in ROB.
Thank you. I have just one other question on this one. We're allocating nearly $1 million appropriation in one-time funds for implementation of the California Motor Voter Program. That's been in existence since 2017.
Correct. We had a one-time funding last year. We were requesting it through the one-time funding again this year based on projections and registration increases over a 5 or 6 year period. We supplied more of that information last year. So we're doing it again through a one-time funds until we get our registration more leveled out, is my understanding, in the next few years, so that we can determine the correct base budget allowance.
So if we're anticipating multiple years, why do we want to do this in one-time increments? Either one of you?
Mostly because there's a lot of change going on in the ROV with regard to adding new equipment and implementing Voters' Choice Act. And at this point, we're not sure that we're going to need an ongoing additional resource. But
it's still clear that we need it this year?
It's clear we need it this year. In the future, it's not clear.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Sharon.
You're welcome.
Other comments or questions, colleagues? All right. If not, I know you heard me earlier on the Voters' Choice Act, so I won't repeat that. Then without objection, we'll consider this item received and move on to the next item. And that is item 6J.
Yeah, for the Technology Services and Solutions Department. The recommended budget for the Technology Services and Solutions budget is $310.1 million. It includes actions to add resources to enhance the information technology architecture, cybersecurity, and asset management, improve training programs, infrastructure, and operations, building capacity to support multiple platforms, enhancing criminal justice and public safety programs, and acquiring equipment including desktops and servers, van, electric lift. It transfers funds to the Internal Services Fund budget. It incorporates the finance agency IT, the next phase of the consolidated IT, and it also provides the funding for information technology projects that are described in detail in the recommended budget book. These projects include about 19 that have a broad, shared benefit countywide, 6 new projects for public safety and justice, 9 for kind of other county administrative departments besides those listed here in these verticals, 9 for social services, 7 new projects for financial employee-related systems, and 1 new project for the health system. We talked about earlier, one of the biggest lifts for the health system with those resources is going to be getting HealthLink implemented throughout the new expanded health and hospital system. And at this point, if there's any questions from the Board of Supervisors, we have the Technology Services and Solutions Department Head present.
Thank you, Mr. Arturias. Supervisor Ellenberg.
I see Dr. Smith is not here, so I'll direct to you, Greg. We'll see. He may stay out. TSS specifically advised against funding 5 projects, yet you're recommending funding 4 of them. Can you walk us through that decision? And then on the flip side, my question to Ann would be, she recommended 43 projects, 51 are being funded. Does TSS have the capacity for those 51 projects? And why is there this discrepancy?
Well, I think the best way to put it in is that at the county executive level, going over all of the projects with not just TSS, but all the departments that were relevant, and looking at the resources available and the vacancies and the amount of work on the table right now, particularly with ITCC yet to be completed, which is a major reclass, and the fact that there are lots of vacancies that are anticipated after the major reclass that we'll have to fill, we tried to pick what we thought was a reasonable number of projects that they could actually do, that we could actually afford, and that were of such a priority that they had to be done quickly. So using sort of those three measures is where we came up with drawing the line, and that involved sending the list back and forth to Ann 4 or 5 times, you know, to come up with the right, what we think is the right number. Obviously, you know, we want to be able to implement something the year that it's funded. Otherwise, we're cutting other things or not funding other things that could be funded that year. So I'll let Ann give you further information on that.
Sure, and I imagine you're not going to say, no, we can't do them, but you did specifically call out against funding 5 of them, so I'm just happy to hear your thoughts.
So in some cases, the reason we called out not funding projects was because of the initial budget constraints that were put in place. When Mr. Aturia gave us an estimate as to what amount of money would be available, we said, this is what we think we can do within that money. The other piece of that was saying to Dr. Smith and Mr. Aturia that if we are going to do additional projects, we need to ensure that we right-size the staffing to support them. And I think we have found that right combination of project funding and staffing to do those projects. You know, and there were some cases where we said, well, we can't fund it, but the message was we think we should. And so in some cases we were able to resolve those issues.
So basically you followed the instructions and then you changed the game plan.
Pretty much.
Got it. Just
Well, I
making
mean,
sure I'm clear.
to be clear, it was a conservative estimate and we worked it back and forth.
Well, you know, we gave them a low-ball offer. They came back and said, okay, well, here's what we can do. Then we re-looked at the revenue, said, we can probably do more than that financially, and there are a few things on this project list that even we are smart enough to know we should do. So we went back to them and said, tell us what you could do with those numbers, knowing what they'd come back with us, and then we let them feel like they had beat us up and got more money out of it.
And now that that precedent's on the record, we'll move ahead. Thanks so much, Ann. That's all I had.
Cindy. Thank you. One question, I just want to get clarification. I have a couple of different documents. The base budget, are we looking at recommended budget of $306 million or $310 million? And are we looking at 874 employees, FTEs, or 921?
So I know the FTE number is the 900 plus number.
Okay.
I don't know if is it 306 or 310. You would have that specific number. That's a little, I can tell you the difference between 300 and 900 employees versus.
So is this sheet the most current one? I've got a couple, 3 different sources.
Yes, what's provided by Mr. Aturia would be the most current.
Right, there's 921 FTEs. We added 36.8 million with these recommendations, and that gives us a total appropriation of 310.1 million.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Any other comments or questions on this item, colleagues? If not, then we'll say thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Aturia, and we'll go on to the next item, which is county comms. Mr. Aturia, are you going to present on this one again?
Yes.
Thank you.
The recommended budget for the County Communications Department is $31.9 million, and it does include recommended action to replace communication service monitor equipment. And at this point, if there are any questions of the Board of Supervisors.
Colleagues, questions on county communications? There appear to be none at this time. Thank you very much. We'll go on to the next item without objection.
Okay. Next item is for Facilities and Fleet Department. The recommended budget for the Facilities and Fleet Department is $716.4 million. It includes recommended actions to add resources for project planning and landscaping, for facility safety and cleanliness improvements, supporting scheduled maintenance, preventive maintenance levels, as well as expanding the maintenance coordination. And one of the biggest drivers for the increase in need for these resources, the acquisition of 2 administrative campuses over the last year with the Tasman campus and the Silver Creek campus. There's also recommended action to increase the lease reserve for future lease costs. Included in these actions is the capital budget. The total recommended capital budget for next fiscal year is $235.8 million. These include a wide variety of improvements through campuses across our spectrum, adding chillers to county clinics, improvements to the receiving assessment and intake center, funding for capital planning, for the new civic center power distribution system, for planning the new child, adolescent, adult inpatient psychiatric facility, construction of the emergency room department expansion, which will double the size of the emergency room for VMC at Bascom, construction for the new Vietnamese American Service Center in San Jose, funding for next fiscal year's energy and sustainability efforts, funding for the jail capital projects reserve. These are for projects currently underway. With so many projects currently underway at our jail facilities, we anticipate some of them will need some supplemental funding as they progress, so there's a recommended reserve for that, so those projects do not get delayed. Includes funding for the county's deferred maintenance program, as well as for planning the East Santa Clara Street campus and master agreement under development. Funding for improvements at the tuberculosis and refugee clinic at Lundy, for remodeling 2450 of Bascom for Behavioral Health Services Department Administration, renovations here at this campus, as well as the new Tasman and Silver Creek properties. Provides funding for acquisition of future medical office buildings on or in very close proximity to the county's hospitals. It includes funding for ROV warehouse upgrades in anticipation of the new election equipment that they're going to be getting, so the warehouse is designed for the new equipment. Includes funding for surveillance and security efforts on the county's campuses, and also for the upgrading of the Women's and Children's Center at the Valley Medical Center. This is all for the first year of a 10-year capital improvement program that over that 10-year horizon targets projected expenditures of $2.2 billion on that 10-year horizon. Major projects include the Animal Services Center that's funded in the recommended budget, as well as the emergency room funded in the recommended budget. The new jail facility that's still is in design, but still a couple years out from construction. The new Vietnamese American Service Center, again, that's in the recommended budget for construction, and psychiatric facility, we mentioned that, under design, construction a couple years out. The annual update to the county improvement program is necessary to keep it a reliable planning tool and to prevent us from overcommitment of resources as we address all the physical structures, improvements, and systems necessary to provide services to the community. And the major changes since the last comprehensive update that we reviewed 1 year ago include the addition of the 2 community hospitals, the 2 administrative campuses, broadening the scope of the psychiatric facility under design, and deferring the Progressive Specialty Center, Public Safety Justice Center, and East Valley Clinic a little further down the line until new funding sources are identified for those. And at this point, We have should have the Director of Facilities and Fleet, and available to answer any questions, or I could also assist with questions regarding the capital improvement program. Thank you.
Supervisor Wasserman.
Thank you. And when this item is over, I had not turned over one page on the previous item with county communications. I wanted to ask a question about that.
All right, but you do have a comment or a question
I
on
do not
this?
have a question on
Okay.
this. I just had my light on to ask when you were done.
All right. So on facilities and fleet, before we take a quick return trip to the previous item, Supervisor Chavez on this item.
Thank you very much. A couple things I just wanted to ask, and Jeff, do you mind? So one is, I know you all have been in the center of a lot of changes, like from a growth perspective and the way we're approaching land use and all of that. And one of the questions that I had that I was really interested in understanding from you is, given all the different projects you have, given the new hospitals, given that we're purchasing more buildings, we're relooking at all of our leases, do you have the support that you need to keep this work going and really to protect our assets?
I would say that I have a really good team. It's already on board and working. We do have some vacancies that we're trying to fill, especially in this hot construction market. Finding good project managers is often very tough. But at the same time, the county executive has left the project management FTE, even though they're vacant on our books for this next year. We have some active recruitments, and we're hopeful we're going to fill those. From a real estate perspective, we've been able to fill all of our real estate positions. It's the first time we've actually had it full here just recently. And from a financial and a budgetary perspective, we have the resources we need to make the programs move forward.
And could you help me understand, even as you're looking at the capital, and I'm on the packet page 69, or actually, I think I'm on 69, the slide 69, and this is just relative to just the capital planning overall, and just to acknowledge that, you know, we don't have a lot of resources, and I do really want to just recognize the prioritization of the new psychiatric center for adults and children, because I know that's put a whole different kind of lay of the land. What I'm in terms of our processing, what I'm wanting to better understand is how does the change in the way we're approaching these programs impact the overall planning that we're doing for the health and the health and hospital system? And in particular, what I'm wondering is that the East Valley Clinic, from my perspective, I know that it had always been tied to the rake, and now it's being decoupled from the rake, which I actually think is the right decision. But I'm just wondering, from a planning perspective, are we relying on changes to that medical facility to enhance our outreach in that community in order to sustain the health and vitality of the system overall?
Maybe I can jump in on that. We are in the midst of a consultation which actually started, 2 years ago, doing the management assessment of the entire health system from a facilities perspective, actually from a program and facilities perspective. Parts of that, led to things like the recommendations regarding the psychiatric facility and the look at a specialty center, a surgery center on campus. But then that all got changed with the availability of the two hospitals, so we're going to have to go back and rework some of that plan. Also involved during that plan was the East Valley Clinic, which we have a plan for. It's a conceptual plan. It's not an architectural plan, but at this point we don't have funding for. So using the program and facilities planning tool, we're transferring those doable plans, financeable plans, into the CIP, and as we get different priorities from the board, things move up and down the CIP, which is why we're trying to be real disciplined with the CIP, because we're running out of equity in order to do lease revenue bonds, and obviously we have a future of tight cash expected. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's the best I can do.
No, that's actually really helpful. I guess what I'm also trying to understand is the cash flow of, in terms of how the business model that we're now employing, which I recognize is new because we have these 2 new hospitals, but how that business model impacts what we want to invest in. And in my mind, there are 2 different buckets. There's the investment that we need to make in order to maintain the health and vitality of the hospital system. That is, if we were running it at, for lack of a better word, in a business-like fashion with an enterprise fund, recognizing that the board's job and our job as a county is a safety net. We're not running it for profit, and so we're going to have a different approach, which is why the psychiatric center connected to those medical services is so critical. That may or may not be a prioritized business decision, but it's a prioritized community value that we want to integrate. What I'm really wanting to understand with the East Valley Clinic being pushed back, does that impact the business side of what we're trying to get done? Is just the...
Okay, well, let me try this. From a cash flow business perspective, we do operate, obviously, BMC as an enterprise fund, and it's operated in an accrual model so that we get paid for our services quite a bit down the line. And the supplemental payments that we rely upon to pay for the underinsured and uninsured are often pushed off by months. So we consistently have a cash flow question mark there. We watch that very closely with cash committee meetings. And we expect with the 2 new hospitals that cash flow will again be a significant problem, which is why we, as Greg mentioned, have a reserve, an ongoing reserve this time, not just a status reserve, because we know that there will be cash flow issues. However, we'd also know that we will catch up to that, and we don't anticipate in the long run to have major significant deficits. Now, as that relates to the East Valley Clinic, it doesn't have a huge financial impact, but we do think it has a huge policy impact, because we do think that there's much more need in that area than we're able to service. In being across the street from regional, lots of our patients end up going to the emergency room instead of being able to get into clinic because it's hard for them to get appointments. So we're trying to figure out stepwise methods of increasing the accessibility into the East Clinic, and you'll be seeing recommendations coming through for urgent care staffing and those kinds of things to try to temporize that while we find the funding we need to actually rebuild. Did that answer the question?
Completely. That was very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else on this item, colleagues, before we go back to the last item? If not, then we'll deem the report from Facilities and Fleet received, and we will go back to County Comms briefly for a follow-up by Supervisor Wasserman. Supervisor?
Thank you. Just a quick question. Hey, Heather. The couple of times that I've gone through County Comm and spoken to the department heads and the employees and stuff, it's an extremely stressful job. And each of the times I've gone through and I've met with department heads over the years, it was a tough time getting qualified people, full-time people to serve and fill the positions. And I noticed in this, the current year FTEs, the proposed FTEs, those are unchanged. I just wondered if very quickly, Heather, you could inform this board of how things are going as far as filling those vacancies. Where do you stand now? Oops, your microphone.
Nope.
Yep,
there
there
it
you are.
is. Heather Plamondon, Director of County Com. Thank you, Supervisors. Yes, we actually are still struggling to find and fill with qualified applicants the positions that we have. We currently have 37 openings, and we're working diligently with ESA and with our own internal staff to try to remedy that. A lot of it, I think, is attributable to training and the length of time that it takes to train people. We're currently in a process of evaluating our positions, the entire classification of all of the dispatcher positions from entry level to chief, to work through making sure that we have them categorized correctly, that we are looking for entry level positions and hiring entry level people that can do the work.
So just for clarification, if I may, you have a full-time staff, you have funded employees, 143.
Mm-hmm.
You currently have 37 vacancies. So more than
Department-wide. So that
more than
100
25% of your FTEs are vacant?
Mhm. Department-wide. But we have also we have a technical side of our department, so it's not just dispatchers.
But all of those are included in your 143?
Yes.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, because it's something I want to help with, and I know this board wants to help with, 37 out of your 143 positions, 25%?
Are vacant.
Are currently vacant?
Correct.
Okay, and it's been roughly that amount since you've been there?
Mm-hmm. I've only been there for 8 months, but yes, since I've been there. We have.
I know, because we miss you at SVRA.
Yes.
But, okay, thank you. That's the clarification I wanted through the chair. Thank you very much.
So I just wanted to clarify one thing, though. Since 2016, we've hired 96 people, and we've been able to keep roughly 20 of those people. And we currently have 7 that are still in the training process. So we're working diligently internally to try to figure out better ways to train them, better ways to give them the information that they need to be able to do this job. Part of what we're working with right now is really antiquated technology, so the county is supporting us in getting us new technology. So we are in the process of trying to procure a new CAD system, which we do believe will make things much easier in terms of having new technology that people are comfortable with and familiar with. Right now, they're working on a very old system.
So the 96 people you hired in the last 4 years, there's only 20 of them left. Okay, thank you. I think I've used enough time on this. I might talk to the Chair of Public Safety and Justice about having you make a presentation. I think this is a significant problem in a very significant area of the county.
And it's industry-wide. It's not just the county. It's across the board.
Yep, and all I care about is us.
I know. Me too. Me too.
I'm with you. Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. I think, colleagues, that takes us to the recommended budget for the capital budget, 6M. Mr. Iteri?
Yeah, we covered that simultaneously when I covered facilities and fleet.
All right. Then we will go to item 6N, which is the recommended budget for the Santa Clara County Library District.
Yep, thank you.
And we do have, in addition to Mr. Iteri, we have the county librarian who is here with us along with her budget staff. We also have the president of the county library board. So we got all kinds of talent if there are any important questions. Go to it.
Very good. The recommended budget for the Santa Clara County Library District is $86.3 million, and the current recommendation is to maintain the current level budget. Do anticipate there could be changes brought forward from the district for board consideration in June when we meet again for the hearings. And at this point, as you noted, we have members in the audience that are able to assist with any questions that the Board of Supervisors may have.
Thank you. Are there comments or questions? I see only Mr. Wasserman's light on.
Just one comment, a shameless PR from the current chair of the library district, who wanted to inform those department heads with us today that are not always the same that are here, that more people visited the Santa Clara County Library System last year than attended Sharks games, Warrior games, Raider games, and 49er games, and Earthquake games combined. Thank you.
All right.
Could I jump in also? for those in the public who don't know, actually, all we do for the library is blow holes in their budget by renegotiating labor contracts. The actual budget is approved by the JPA. But I'd like to do a shout out for Nancy Howe, who reports to the JPA, reports to me, reports to the Board of Supervisors, and reports to the friends of the libraries in each particular individual library, and to the city councils in each particular region, and has the unique ability to put it all together and make the whole thing work in a state-of-the-art manner, where we have a library system which is the envy of much of the country. So thanks very much, Nancy.
All right. Well, take that. I think that's it for our library district. That's 6N. That leaves us with 6O and P. So 6O, Finance Agency, including so on and so forth. Mr. Atteria.
Yes, thank you. The recommended budget for the Finance Agency, which does include the Controller, Treasurer, Department of Tax and Collections, as well as the Clerk Recorder, includes a total appropriation of $269.3 million. It includes recommended actions to create the centralized timekeeping support unit, to increase debt collection services related to the hospitals, and also for resources to improve the public records management. And at this point, we have the agency director and department heads here from the Finance Agency if the board has any questions.
Colleagues. There are no comments or questions. Thank you for being with us today. And without objection, we'll consider 6N received, and we'll go to 6P, Recommended Budget for Employee Services Agency.
Thank you. The recommended budget for the Employee Service Agency totals $43.4 million. It includes recommended actions to add resources to create a leave management team, as well as to enhance support for employee benefits, administration, and to strengthen support of fiscal functions within the agency. And at this point, I see the agency director is here. If there's any questions from the Board of Supervisors.
Supervisors, any comments or questions on 6P? Supervisor Ellenberg.
Can I get some more information, please, on the leave management teams? What is the data on leaves? What are the numbers? What's the expected workload for FTEs? Feels like a lot, and I'm just curious to know a little bit more about that.
Mr. Mills, would you like to respond? Would you like to respond with a live mic, Mr. Mills?
Yes, thank you. John Mills, Employee Services Agency Director. Supervisor Ellenberg, relative to the leaves management teams, I know you asked a couple questions specifically about your first question about data. Part of the rationale behind the recommendation to establish centralized leave management teams in the ESA employee service centers is because currently employees on leave is not consistently supported across the county in a centralized way, and part of the byproduct of that is we don't have great data across the county in terms of the types of leave, the number of employees out on leave at any given time, and how they're being tracked and managed.
There's not, I'm sorry, you said we don't have consistent
support of departments. Right now, the way leaves are managed in most areas of the county is the individual manager or supervisor of a given employee is the person who tracks the leave for that employee while they're out.
And does that person also, now this is sort of a side question because that's sort of stunning information, do we have countywide policies regarding what sort of leave is paid and unpaid, or is that left up to the manager or department as well?
We do have policies in various states of being current. And that's also going to be part of the task of the leaves management teams, is to bring us up to date so that we have a consistent set of policies that can be applied countywide.
And it feels to you like there's enough work for 4 FTEs?
So to your point about the 4 FTEs, there's a number of sort of moving pieces that underlie these specific requests. One of those moving pieces is the fiscal year prior to the fiscal year that we are currently in. We kicked off a very critical look at our human resources information system, because historically our system had been customized to an extent to accommodate essentially the way the county does business and sort of the to administer the labor agreements that we've agreed to over many, many years, to the point that we haven't always been able to update our system and implement new modules when they're available from PeopleSoft, which is the vendor. And so what we did as part of this critical look was we basically initiated what we're calling a re-implementation of our human resources information system so that we can begin to bring it into the present day and use a lot of that functionality that we haven't heretofore been able to use. And so as part of that process, one of the first modules, if you will, that we're going to be implementing is one that focuses on benefits administration, and we're just initiating the testing phase on that module right now with the hope that we will be implementing it in late August or early September. And that implementation is going to help to streamline a lot of our workflow that's currently manual in the employee service centers and the benefits department. By streamlining a lot of that workflow, we're going to be able to free up the time of some of our staff to be able to dedicate to this leaves management issue, which we see as incredibly critical to be able to focus our attention on, because that is very much sort of person intensive process that involves meeting with the individual employees, sort of making sure they understand the conditions of their leave, how time will be integrated, how it will be tracked. And departments don't really have the resources or the expertise to be able to manage that as adequately as we think we can support them in managing it. So there'll be more people than just the 4 people who are in the budget request who are actually going to lead that effort.
Okay, so a lot of the pieces that you just brought up lead me to think also about really good ways to measure success. In your department, do you have goal? I mean, I'm sure you have goals, but the success measure here that's called out is just stakeholder engagement. And I'm thinking that certainly aligning the leave policies, employee retention, medium time to hire, all of those, I think, are really critical goals that really drive everything at the county, because everything funnels through your office. Are you looking at other success measurements, and can I suggest that you do add some?
Absolutely, yes, and in varying degrees, all of the above. I will say that I believe it was last year and the year before, in terms of the measures of success that was highlighted in the recommended budget, we did call out what we referred to as recruitment cycle time. That kind of wasn't a measure that was necessarily ready for prime time, because we didn't have and are still in the process of creating the sort of data infrastructure to be able to measure that in a meaningful way. We knew that that was something that we wanted to measure, but then in order to be able to collect the data that we needed to measure that, which resides in multiple different systems currently, it was a very manual and time-intensive process. And so what we did in order to address that is we've initiated a technology project with TSS to be able to create a recruitment dashboard that pulls from these various data repositories, and eventually the idea is that will be visible to us and to the departments so that we have transparency and accountability of our process. The measure that's highlighted in the budget around stakeholder engagement, that ties very well with sort of what Dr. Smith was speaking to earlier about cross-functional teams. In ESA, we've begun just over the last 6 months a very fruitful partnership with the Center for Leadership and Transformation from the Stanford Center for Professional Development. And we've initiated sort of several starter teams, I guess I would call them, are sort of pioneers. And the process of CLT is to be able to initially undergo a diagnosis phase, which involves communication with your stakeholders and gathering of data in terms of how they view you, view the quality of the service, view the response time, some of the things that were discussed earlier related to the county council client survey. And so we're focusing on that right now, but to your point, and we're also actually going to be starting up a cross-functional team around the leaves management topic, just to be able to get everyone to sort of have ownership of problem solving that one. And that's going to also involve sort of a measuring of the initial temperature, and then as we start to ramp that up, then you circle back on a regular basis and get more data and see how you're doing.
I should also bring up that we have a presentation coming to the board. I think we decided to move it till August because of budget, but they'll go through everything that's being done from the leadership and transformation process assessment in ESA HR.
I like and respect that we really are internally focused on this culture shift and being an organization of learning and growth. I want to make sure, though, that we don't kind of process ourselves right out of the room, so that we're not also really focused on things that I want to say matter every day. All of this matters, of course, but really thinking about the vital importance of our workforce. We do nothing without a well-engaged, happy, healthy, well-paid workforce. And what I hear, and again, this is anecdotally, which is why I'm interested in data, is that the biggest critique or most frequent critique tends to be the amount of time it takes to hire and onboard people. So I would really hope that that's a place that we are very intentionally focusing.
Yes.
And looking at barriers and how we can make that. I like the transparency dashboard. I would hope that applicants would also have some access to that too, to see where their application is in whatever happens when things get into this building.
Yes, we are.
That's part of it too. Good. I will look forward to that as well then. Thank you.
Colleagues, in the absence of any other items for comment or question on 6P, Employee Services Agency, I think we can deem that item received. That takes us to item number 7, which is to recess to 6:30 if necessary, which it is not. So we will recess to Tuesday, May 14th. That is tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. in these same board chambers. And without objection and hearing none, we will stand in recess, and that will make items 8 and 9 moot. We'll see you all tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. Thank you very much.